I'm excited to have Bryce Johnson today on Mastering Military Life. We're talking about tapping into resources to tap out of the military, how to handle this transition into civilian life, and kind of redefining yourself in a new profession. So, Bryce, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to jump into this. Can you give us an idea of what military life was like for you? When did you get in? Where were you stationed? What did you do?
So I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2008, and then I went to Air Force pilot training. Graduated in 2010 and spent the next 11 years flying a variety of aircraft, primarily the MQ-1 and MQ-9 drones, so big drones. There's actually one right there. And then also the C-130J. I was stationed at Creech Air Force Base, and I spent about 7 years there. Also was stationed at Ramstein Air Force Base and deployed twice with the RPAs, once to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. I left active duty in 2020 and joined the Air National Guard then as a part-time member, and I've been in the Guard since.
You have a wife and kids. So, how did that align with your journey as well?
So part of that was when my wife and I got married back in 2011, we had a discussion and said, you're going to be married to me and the Air Force for at least the next decade. Because with the contract as a pilot training graduate, I had to sign a 10-year ADSC, active duty service commitment, which is pretty long for the military. So I knew that we were going to have a time period where the Air Force was going to drive what we could do. And that 2020 was going to be the first time we could make that decision on what to do. And that's where we were having that conversation throughout is this the life we want to have for our family? What do we want to do? And then making sure that we're making that decision with open minds and that once we execute that decision.
I love that. And you had mentioned in kind of conversations prior that you didn't really feel like you fully fit in the Air Force or in your
Well,
position.
it
Can you
was
expand on that?
it was less than the C-130 community. So I have a interesting career where I flew through three different airplanes, the MQ-1, then the MQ-9, and then the Air Force gave me an opportunity to fly the C-130 out of Ramstein Air Base in Germany. And for the 2 years I was there, I didn't really feel like I fit in. I couldn't figure out. It was just they had inside jokes, they had more experience. My experience didn't translate to there. So it was difficult to be in that organization because this is should be the pinnacle of a career, spending time flying around Europe and Africa in the C-130, and it just wasn't there. So once I came back to the RPA community, I at least knew that I had a home there, and this is where I best fit in within the Air Force. And that's why when I started looking at potentially going part-time in the Air National Guard, I made sure to really look and see about RPA units. And in fact, there is one in Des Moines, Iowa, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we live in Omaha. And that played a very big role in the decision to get out.
Yes, let's talk about that decision to get out. When did that start sneaking in? When did we decide not to re-enroll and start looking at paths to transition out?
So it kind of started at the end of the C-130 time, where the Air Force gave the C-130 squadron a bill and said, we need X number of pilots to go fly RPAs. And I was one of those people selected. At that point, I kind of knew this wasn't a long-term fit, so I understood where it's coming. But it was right before my majors board. So for the officer side, there are for second and first lieutenant, captain, those ranks are kind of as long as you don't really get in trouble, you'll be able to make those. But major is the first rank in which there is a possibility that you won't earn that rank. And so in 2017, I was 7% of my year group that wasn't promoted. And that is crushing. So, 90+% of my classmates were going on to the next rank of major, and I was not. So that made the decision kind of really easy for me because I knew that my future lieutenant colonel, some of those other ranks might not be possible on active duty. I ended up through a variety of factors getting promoted the next year to major. So I was still at that rank, but I at least received that feedback from the Air Force that squadron command, some of those other type positions just might not be in the bag. And with the military, particularly with officer promotions, it can be really hard to know where you are unless you're on the very top or the very bottom. That middle ground can be difficult. So by being able to get that feedback, which was a blessing at the time, we were able to make better decisions going forward.
How did that change kind of your day-to-day to showing up to work before you transitioned out? Just that feeling of kind of where you fell in the pack.
I mean, it felt, especially when I didn't make it, that people knew. People could do the math because it's typically by year group. So, hey, this person's been in the Air Force for so many years. And it felt bad, like being told in front of all your peers that you are not good enough for the next rank really hurt. And I will commend my commander in that squadron when I left. Fever is his call sign, and he's gone on to lead the wing at Creech Air Force Base and some other roles. But he made sure that I didn't completely lose my confidence. It gave me some opportunities to show that I could truly excel and take on the next role. And he fought for me up at those upper levels. So then when it came time to promote to major, I at least felt ready and in those roles.
Wonderful. So once you were like, hey, we're going to transition out, it's time. You started looking into resources and started to prepare yourself for that transition. What resources did you explore during that time?
So I did a little bit of everything. And one of the first things we kind of needed to figure out is where we wanted to be. So the vast majority of people that leave my career field I was an MQ-9 instructor pilot teaching launch and recovery operations would go do the job on a civilian side. So either as an instructor at the schoolhouse I was already working in Las Vegas, or they were deployed roles. So where they would deploy overseas for 3 to 6 months at a time, and then they'd come home and do whatever they wanted during that time. And the pay on that is really, really good. At least it was when I was leaving. But one of the discussions we had was our oldest daughter was one at the time. It's like, do I want to be gone? One of the discussions of leaving active duty, in fact, the phrase we used was 3 moves and a 365, is that if I were to stay on, we're most likely going to move 3 more times, and I was most likely going to have to do a 365 year-long deployment. And so as we were having those discussions, that was always in the back of our head. And that was one thing that I didn't want to do, is I didn't want to go into a deployment role, even with the amount of money that's being offered, and missing my kids grow up for 6 months at a time. So that didn't seem to go. And then it really opened up a lot of possibilities. Part of the things that opened up the possibilities is Kim being an ambassador for PCS Pay It Forward and license in her real estate and doing real estate gave us that opportunity to where I didn't need to get income immediately. I didn't need to completely replace my income as a major in the Air Force. I could look and explore and try to figure out some other things to do.
So once you decided that you're getting out, and you kind of decided that I'm not going to do what everyone else does, I'm not going to do this overseas, I'm not going to become an instructor. What were the steps that you took to start looking into different career paths and different industries that you wanted to apply yourself to?
So one of the first things I did was I started to go to job fairs. As a graduate of the Air Force Academy, I have the ability to go to these job fairs that are specifically for grads. And so I went to one in San Diego. We actually met you there while we were in San Diego, and got to talk to a lot of companies, a lot of GE, Facebook. There are a lot of very large national companies there. But I quickly learned something, is that I needed to decide if it was more important to have the specific type job that I want, or if it's more important to live in the specific location. And by that time, I knew that we wanted to move to Omaha so we could be closer to family. And so Kim could support military families as the ambassador at Offutt Air Force Base. And so then I had to kind of narrow my search. And then a lot of those national job fairs suddenly didn't become as useful to me, because Amazon has a great military program for people that can lead their warehouses and go up, but they place you where you want to go. GE also has a great program, Procter & Gamble, but you are being told where to go and where to start. And that was something that after moving 7 times in 11 years, I wanted to make that decision. So that very quickly kind of narrowed the focus. It wasn't like maybe we can do this for this time. It's like, I need to focus on companies in the Omaha metro area. So those military focused national job fairs weren't as useful to me. This is also bunch of work going remote. So there really wasn't that expectation that a job could be done remotely out in the world. So what I started to do was, once I left active duty, I was on terminal leave in January of 2020, is I started to go to every event I could. I kind of invited myself to Chamber of Commerce events. Some people I already knew in town, I was asking them for help. And so they started inviting me to things. I started to meet people, meet business leaders. And a lot of it was to figure out both what I wanted to do and then if how to pitch myself to these people because I'm making a complete career change in my mid 30s. I am 35 when I'm doing this. I have a master's degree, thankfully from a local university, but skills that don't necessarily easily translate, which I'm sure is an experience that a lot of our military members have, where you got really good at something for a long time, but now you got to translate those skills and do that. And one thing, first piece of advice is figure out what those skills are and really think about what are those soft skills and how can I translate those skills? There are a lot of military skill translators. Some are good, some are bad, but it can at least get you thinking of where, sure, you led a platoon, but that also means that you're a manager and you managed the work effort. And if you're a battalion commander or a leader in that, suddenly you're director level. And so you can have those discussions about the leadership that you've done, or also think about those additional duties. So one of the additional duties, that's what we call the jobs where you have your primary job. So I was primarily a pilot, but then I did other stuff. And one of those other things was I was the chief of the commander's action group for a group commander. So an O6 colonel. And my job was to kind of solve problems for him, where he'd come to me and say, hey, we have this thing. Can you figure this out? And I really liked that role. I liked being able to be kind of given a problem, given a box to work in, and then off to the races to figure out what's going on. And so learning about new things, being able to interact with a wide variety of people, and then go back to the leader and say, hey, here's what I figured out. Now, here are the 3 action items that I need you to do. And once I kind of did the inner work of thinking about like, okay, I like doing that. How can I do that on the civilian world? I got a lot closer to what I could potentially do and where I ended up coming.
I think you said a number of powerful things there. The first one is you have to know what you want, right? You have to be able to prioritize what's important to your family. And sometimes when the world is our oyster, the world is really fucking overwhelming. And so it can almost feel like paralyzing. So if you were someone who just transitioned out, like taking Bryce's lead of like, what's the most important to their family is to be able to choose where they wanted to live. And that was the first step that you took that gave you control in this system. The second thing I love that you just said is that you didn't rely on staying behind a computer to start networking locally, because I think that that is a tendency in our remote world, right? It's like we stay in, we go on LinkedIn, we go on Indeed, we go on these online forums and these platforms, but instead you quote unquote invited yourself, which was probably open events to the community, right? You were probably welcomed with open arms, and you show up in person. And I'm guessing that when you told people you were just X amount of years of service in the military, what you came out as, and that you were an Air Force grad, usually like business owners' eyes light up. And I've seen this with my husband, Brad, is that you don't understand your value on the market of what you bring to a business because we think it's only applicable on the military side. But every task that you do in the military is so applicable on the business side. It's that translation that you were saying, right? And so once you start making that translation and seeing how powerful managing people is, managing projects, hitting deadlines, hitting KPIs are in like the business world, you can see the tremendous amount of value that you can have to any company. I think that is such an important part of like building the confidence as we're coming and transitioning into civilian life, because like you said, it's like that inner work that needed to happen, right? You needed to realize that the skills that you gained were applicable in another industry and another setting. So tell me more about that inner work. What did that look like for you?
So a lot of it was I had at least a 30-minute commute each way to the airbase. So I had a lot of time to think. And part of it was I started with a very wide range. So I knew I didn't want to do 100% commission-based sales because, wife's a realtor, I wanted to make sure that I had a type of job that, biweekly paycheck works fine. And then it was taking those thoughts and skills. So my time as a commander's action group. I also spent time, it was only a month, but I was a line operations safety auditor where the Air Force said, go to these bases, observe people flying, use this particular way of tracking errors and threats, and then write up reports. And so I would do that where I would sit behind people and I'd write it up. And what I really liked about that is it gave me the ability to impact problems where I could point things out and say, this is a problem, not because the people can't do it, but because the system is built in a way that hurts. And so let's fix that. And I could advocate for those systematic changes using this role. And so as a thing, I like to solve problems. I like problems that are kind of, ambiguous, and maybe I can be a consultant. So then a friend of mine or an academy grad that I knew, works for one of the big four consulting groups. And so I called him or I messaged him on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I was thinking about this. Can we talk? And that's when I learned about their travel schedule, where consulting's definitely pre-COVID, you're gone Monday through Thursday every week. So I was like, okay, thinking about the goals that I had previously of not wanting to be in a role that's a lot of travel, maybe this isn't the type job for me. But I was able to get that knowledge and gain that knowledge before. Because another thing you said, people want to help veterans and military towns, outside of military towns. Like if there's a way that they can help a vet, then do it. So raise your hand, be that vet. You don't have to be like, well, like I don't deserve it. I only did 3 years. Like, no, put your hand up. Let them help you because it both helps them because they want to support veterans. It helps you because you get a job. And then ultimately everybody wins at the end.
I found that there's a lot of people out there who don't speak military, right? But if you have the guts to raise your hand and say, hey, I am struggling with translating what I did in the military and how that would be helpful with the business, and you say it to any established business owner, they're like, well, tell me what you did. And they can easily be like, oh, so it sounds like you did X, Y, and Z, and the result was this. This is how that's applicable in the business. So again, getting out there and doing those networkings that you were talking about, right? Having those real life conversations, but not being scared to say, hey, I think I can bring value to a company, but I'm struggling in the translation.
Take all the help you can get and realize some of it's going to work for you, some of it's not. And so it doesn't mean that the help was bad. It just doesn't necessarily work for you in that situation. Hiring's hard enough right now. You throw your resume in and it seems like nobody hears it. So you might as well use every advantage that is given to you because you've served our country.
Absolutely. You use the USO Pathfinder Program. How did you find that program in terms of being helpful and supportive?
So that was the most helpful one for me, which unfortunately I haven't looked recently. I think it's gone. But I talked to the person, USO Pathfinder, and I was doing the same. It's like, well, I think maybe consulting, but I don't know about consulting. And she said, have you thought about getting a green belt? I'm like, what is that? It's like, it's a continuous improvement certification. And there's a class that starts next week at Nellis. I bet I can get you in. And so she got me that last seat in that course. And this was 3 months before I separated. And that's what ultimately set me on this journey to doing continuous improvement work was I went into this class, I'm like, oh, this is how my brain works. I've been doing those things already, but I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what a Kaizen was. I didn't know what a root cause analysis was. I didn't know how to do a process map. But once I had learned those steps, it was like, oh, this is something I can do. And then I earned the certification for free, paid for by the Air Force. And now I had a certification that I could go forth and use. And so that's another piece of advice is there's a lot of military certifications. The Air Force does offer a green belt. So if you're interested in doing that, it's completely free. It's a 40-hour CBT, and then you have to do a project. And so that's a great option. Also, another great program is from Syracuse University. It's called Onward to Opportunity. And so if you're looking at getting your project management certificate, and they also offer a bunch of different IT certificates, it's available for active duty, veterans, I believe military spouses. They have a whole list of stuff. So check it out. That is another opportunity. So as you do the big work and thinking, okay, this is what I want to do. I think I've narrowed it down. Then you can start looking at certifications to help supplement the work that you've already done in the military.
Now that you're removed, right, and you've been out for some time, what advice do you wish that someone would have given you earlier in the process?
I think a lot of it is just you have to do the work. Nobody is going to hand you a job and say, hey, here's a 6-figure job because you are a troop. Like you have to do the work. You have to do the inner work in figuring out what you want to do, what you're thinking about, what jobs would befit your talents. And then you also have to do the other work of talking to people. You have to go to the interviews, practice the interviews, make sure, they talk about the STAR answers and make sure you have an answer and you can tell that story. And I know with the military, we spend a lot of times like, well, it was the team, it was this. Like, no, this is the time to raise your hand and said, I did this. I led this team. Because the business doesn't care that your coworkers were good at stuff. They want to know that you're going to be good at stuff for them. And so don't be afraid to kind of let that ego rise up and show. It can be a little intimidating, especially if after like 1, maybe 2 enlistments, to be able to do that because we're taught to be humble about our work, but this is the time to not do it.
And to really advocate for yourself and your abilities and the results that you helped get.
Nobody is going to just hand you a job. And so you have to advocate for that. And as you're doing that inner work, have that 30-second elevator pitch of like, I'm a recently transitioned Air Force veteran. I was a pilot for 11 years, left as an instructor pilot. I'm interested in continuous improvement work, and solving problems is kind of my jam. And by being able to do that with anybody, you could then, they might not be able to help you, but they know somebody else. And a lot of cities, even like big cities, there are small networks of people and there are small networks of veterans. And so leverage those veterans, because everybody, they're not pulling the ladder up behind them. They're bringing you up that ladder to come join you. You just
How
have to
did
find out where
you,
they are.
I was gonna say, how did you find the Omaha veterans community?
So I followed somebody on LinkedIn and then they posted about a new group. So there is a Omaha veterans group. And this one I found like the most useful for me because it's a bunch of middle-aged, but mid-career professionals who are veterans and are all over the place. So it's that variety of people and they all want to help and they all want to do stuff. And we meet once a quarter. And it's really great to know that there's this other group here that is really helpful. And that's another case of where going online, Facebook, the city you want to live in, veterans, the business you want to work in, veterans. Like that's the way to find these groups and then just reach out.
Yeah. So you mentioned LinkedIn played a role, and I know that LinkedIn has a deal offering, I think, veterans a free year of premium. What's the difference in premium and why should our veterans be using it?
So with premium, you get some other features. One of the big ones is you can message a certain number of people that aren't in your immediate network for free, because otherwise there's a cost associated with it. There are also additional factors with job hunting. So you fill out your profile and you can say, this is the type of role I want, and they can help you. It's like, hey, I can help you write a cover letter. I can tell you if you're a good fit for this. And there's also other treatments. So I actually got my black belt through LinkedIn because they have a certification. So as you go through your certifications and thinking about what you want to do, I'm not saying it, somebody's going to hire you because you did an hour class on AI, but at least it gives you that ability to both see if it's something you'd like and also be able to show to others that you've done the work.
So what did you use as like an opener when you were reaching out to people on LinkedIn? Did you ask straight up like, hey, are you hiring veterans? Or did you use something like that where it's like, hey, I just completed the certification, I just completed this course, and kind of use that as a soft opener?
I did a lot of informal interviews, or when I met people at these in-person events and they said, hey, like, let me know if you want to chat. And so I would talk to them and, get that coffee conversation's another name for it, but just to find out what they do, what the role looks like and how that looks like. So I shared earlier, which hopefully it goes in the show notes, 2 articles from Experimental History, which is a Substack. And he really placed kind of what I'd say the crust of the job finding in. And it's like with these jobs, you have to unpack what is actually done. So being a pilot sounds super cool. What do you do as a pilot? You must just fly, go back to base, high five everybody, and then go to the bar. Well, no, like you do hours of preparation before the flight. You have to look at all this information. You have to look at weather, flight routes, all this stuff. And then afterwards, you're going to spend, depending on the flight, 1 to 2 hours just talking about all the mistakes you made and be like, here are all the things we did wrong. And that's what flying is. That's what being a pilot is. And so if that doesn't sound fun or nice, then maybe don't do that. The goal is to find something that you're crazy enough about that you enjoy. And then that's the type of role you want to find. I am perfectly happy watching processes, finding improvements and ways, raising my hand and saying, wait, but why? And that's where my skill sets ultimately lie and where my joy from work comes from.
Which ironically may have been a roadblock for you in the military because people don't like you asking, but why?
Yeah, I think the phrase was shut up and color. There were times when it happened versus raising your hand and be like, hold on, why do we do it this way? And sometimes there's a lot of very good reasons for why certain things are done certain ways, especially with safety. But otherwise, it's like, well, like this is how it goes. Just talk to people. That's all you have to do. It's awkward, it's weird. It feels like going on a bunch of first dates of being like, are they going to like me? I don't know. But you need to be able to talk to them. Coming up as a veteran that isn't looking for a handout, but looking for a hand up is the way to do it. And that is where I think that one of the things that I did relatively well was doing that, where by being able to have these conversations, and even my first role in continuous improvement, my boss at the time and the person who hired me, her husband's in the Air National Guard. And so she knew enough about the military that she was willing to take a chance on me, even though I had zero experience healthcare, zero experience doing continuous improvement, because she knew I could learn. She knew that I could do the work and that I'd be reliable.
I love that. How did Kim support you through this transition in a way that was meaningful to you? We have a lot of spouses that are in our communities, a lot of spouses who are going to listen to this, maybe because their spouse isn't who is actually transitioning out isn't open to it, listening to themselves yet. Maybe they're closed down to it. What did your spouse do to support you during the transition?
One of the big things was being a sounding board, because it's a lot of frustration. It's, having to do a complete career change and then, mini crises every few weeks. And then also she held the load at the house while I was going out to all these events and going to these interviews and sitting at the kitchen table and writing another cover letter and tweaking my resume. And so being able to give me that time and space in order to do that was hugely helpful. And then also, I know this isn't the case for every military family, but she was bringing in money. And so I didn't have to, it wasn't my military paycheck stops on Friday. I need to have a job on Monday. We had some flexibility where I could take a job that paid less initially than what I made in the military, so I could grow along that career path and being able to, get up to that previous and then pass that previous income.
This is going to help so many people, hopefully give them a path to kind of XYZ, take the right steps to put themselves in the position to be successful transitioning out. And just know that there is a spectrum of how those feelings go, right? When you're going through the transition. So be open with your spouse about how you're feeling, because it's not a home run every single time. It's going to take time. It's going to take work, but putting yourself out there continuously is part of the process of finding what you love to do next.
And then if anybody wants to reach out and talk about it, find me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com, Bryce-Johnson 85. More than willing to talk to anybody transitioning out. I'm but one data point, but hopefully a useful data point as you talk to people and figure out what you want to do next. More than happy to point you towards resources I've used, resources I've stayed away from, and then hopefully help you on your journey towards being a civilian.
I love that. So thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to help.
All right, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.